My name is Brooke Merritt, and I'm 35. 6 days after we buried my mother, my brother changed the locks on the house I grew up in and set my daughter's things on the porch in the rain. Nora's sneakers were soaked through. Her stuffed rabbit was face down in a puddle. And Garrett stood in the doorway. Our father's doorway. The doorway of a house that's been in this family since 1890. And told me I was nobody. "The land stays with the Merritt son," he said. "Girls marry out. You should have learned that a long time ago." He said more after that. He said I should enjoy being homeless. He said he'd made sure I'd get nothing. But here's what Garrett didn't count on. There was one final section to that will. And when the lawyer read it out loud, when he announced my net worth to a room full of people who'd spent my entire life calling me the leftover child, my brother hit the floor. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, the channel where quiet people finally get the last word, and the paperwork does the shouting. If a family ever made you feel like the spare child, the one they forgot to count, this one's for you. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is, and be sure to subscribe. Now, let me take you back to Marietta, Ohio, population 8,000, give or take, where the Merritt name still means something. Or at least, it used to. Marietta sits where the Muskingum meets the Ohio River. It's the kind of town where people know your grandfather's name and your credit score and which pew you sit in on Sundays. The Merritts helped build half the houses on Front Street. My great-grandfather started the shop, Merritt and Son Woodworks, in 1947, and the sign still hangs on 3rd Street in hand-carved walnut. My father, Tom Merritt, ran that shop for 31 years. He was good with his hands and terrible with his daughters. I say daughters, but there was only one. Me. And then there was Garrett. 6 years older, the firstborn son, the one whose name fit the sign. Growing up, the division was simple. Garrett went to the shop after school. I went to the kitchen with my mother, Ruth. Garrett learned to joint boards and read blueprints. I learned to make casseroles and keep quiet. My father had a phrase he repeated like a prayer. Every Thanksgiving, every property tax season, every time someone asked about the business. "The land stays with the Merritt son. Girls marry out." He said it the way you'd say the sun rises in the east. Not cruel, just fact. Ruth would press her lips together and pass the potatoes. I'd stare at my plate and count the peas. When I was 15, I asked my father if I could work in the shop on Saturdays. He looked at me like I'd asked to rewire the house. "What for?" he said. "You're not staying." I left Marietta 3 years later with a duffel bag and a flat carpenter's pencil my father had given me when I was 9, the kind carpenters use, with the wide graphite. He'd tucked it behind my ear one afternoon and said, "There. Now you look like a Merritt." It was the only time he ever said that to me. I put myself through Ohio State. Accounting degree, then a master's in forensic accounting. The kind of work where you follow money through shell companies and fake invoices until you find the person who thought they were smarter than the spreadsheet. I was good at it. Really good. By 26, I was working at a firm in Columbus, pulling apart fraud cases that made the evening news. By 29, I'd started my own shop, Merritt Forensic Group. 3 employees, then 8, then 22. I built it in a rented office above a sandwich place on High Street, and I built it alone. Garrett called my work the calculator job. My father called it something to do until you settle down. Ruth, my mother, just asked if I was eating enough. Nobody in Marietta knew what forensic accounting was, and nobody cared to learn. At family dinners, when Garrett talked about the shop expansion or his plan to flip spec houses, my father leaned in and nodded. When I mentioned closing a 7-figure fraud case for a Fortune 500 client, he'd say, "That's nice, Brooke, pass the rolls." So I stopped mentioning it. I stopped bringing up the firm, the clients, the growth. I kept the carpenter's pencil in the inside pocket of my bag, a flat rectangle of cedar and graphite that smelled like the shop, like sawdust and my father's hands. I carried it everywhere. Not because I missed him exactly, because it reminded me what a Merritt was supposed to look like, and how quietly I'd become one anyway. By the time I sold a majority stake in the firm in 2023, my net worth was north of $5 million. My family thought I rented a one-bedroom apartment and drove a Honda because I couldn't afford better. I drove a Honda because I liked it. Nobody ever asked. My father died 14 months ago. Heart attack. He was standing at the planer in the shop on a Tuesday morning, running a piece of white oak through the blades, and his heart just stopped. The paramedics said he was gone before he hit the floor. I got the call at my desk in Columbus. Gwen, my business partner, drove me to Merritt because my hands wouldn't stop shaking long enough to grip a steering wheel. When I arrived, Garrett was already holding court in the living room, accepting condolences, shaking hands with men from the Rotary Club. He'd put on a blazer. He looked like a man who'd been rehearsing for this role his entire life. I handled everything else. The funeral home arrangements, the death certificates, the insurance calls, the church bulletin. Ruth was too hollowed out to function, and Garrett was too busy being the grieving son in public to do any of the grieving son work in private. I didn't complain. That's my flaw, if you want to call it that. I see a gap, and I fill it. I see a job nobody wants, and I take it. Over-responsibility, my therapist calls it. The compulsion to carry everything yourself because nobody taught you it was safe to put things down. After the funeral, I noticed something. Ruth had a meeting with Raymond Voss, my parents' estate attorney, at his office on 3rd Street. She went alone. She came back quieter than usual, but steadier, like someone who'd made a decision. I asked if everything was okay. She patted my hand. Your father's affairs are complicated, she said. Voss is sorting it out. I didn't push. I should have. But I had Nora to get back to, and a firm to run, and a mother who seemed like she wanted to carry this one thing by herself. So I let her. Ruth had a stroke 6 weeks ago. She was sitting in the garden, pulling weeds from the flower bed she'd kept up since I was born, and something in her brain gave way. The neighbor found her face down in the marigolds. She died at Marietta Memorial 3 hours later. I was in the car within 20 minutes of the call. Nora sat in the back seat watching the Ohio farmland blur past the window, not saying anything because 7-year-olds can feel when something is too big for words. The funeral was at First Congregational, the church where 4 generations of Merritts had been baptized and buried. 100 people came. Garrett gave the eulogy. He stood at the pulpit in a charcoal suit, Tom Ford if I had to guess, and spoke for 12 minutes. He talked about carrying the family name. He talked about the shop. He talked about what it meant to be a Merritt son, standing where his father and grandfather had stood. He mentioned Ruth's cooking. He mentioned her garden. He did not mention that she'd spent the last 14 months alone in that house, managing a grief she shouldn't have had to manage by herself. He did not mention me at all. Afterward, in the fellowship hall, Aunt Carol, Ruth's younger sister, pulled me aside and squeezed my arm. Beautiful service, she said. Your father would have been proud of Garrett. I almost laughed. I didn't. At the coat rack, as I was helping Nora into her jacket, a man in a gray wool suit appeared beside me. Raymond Voss. 66 years old, dry as chalk dust, the kind of lawyer who measures words like a pharmacist measures pills. Stay in town, he said quietly. Your father made changes to the will after Garrett's troubles. You'll want to hear them. Both of you, together. Then he nodded once and walked away. 6 days after the funeral, Garrett called me. I was in the kitchen of my parents' house, my mother's house, making oatmeal for Nora. The morning light came through the window over the sink the way it always had, flat and golden, catching the dust motes above the counter. I need you out by Friday, Garrett said. No preamble. No, how are you? Just the demand, like a contractor giving a deadline. Excuse me? The house, Brooke, it's mine. Dad made that clear for 30 years. Probate is a formality. Voss will confirm it. I need you and the kid out so Sloan and I can start the renovation. The kid. He called my daughter the kid. We haven't had the reading yet, I said. There's nothing to read. You know the rule. The land stays with the Merritt son. You left. I stayed. End of discussion. I could hear Sloan in the background, her voice a bright, sharp thing. Tell her Friday at the latest, babe. I gripped the counter. Nora was watching me from the table, spoon halfway to her mouth. I'm not leaving until Voss reads the will, I said. Then you'll leave with nothing, Garrett said. And then, and I want you to hear this exactly, because he said it like he'd practiced it. Like it was a line in a script he'd been writing in his head for years. Hope you enjoy being homeless, Brooke. I made sure you get nothing. He hung up. I set the phone on the counter face down. I finished making the oatmeal. I sat across from my daughter and I ate. Because that's what you do when someone tries to take the ground out from under you. You plant your feet and you eat your breakfast. When I tried my key on the front door that evening, the lock had already been changed. The brass key on its cracked leather fob, the one my father gave me at 18, saying, "For when you come home," turned in the cylinder and caught. Dead. The boxes were on the porch by the time I walked around back. 3 cardboard moving boxes, the cheap kind from the hardware store on Pike Street. Nora's clothes, my suitcase, Ruth's recipe tin, the one she'd promised me, the one with index cards in her handwriting going back 40 years. All of it sitting in a half-inch of rainwater on the wooden planks where my mother used to drink her morning coffee. Sloane opened the front door. She was wearing a cream cashmere wrap and holding a glass of Sancerre like she was hosting a gallery opening. "Oh," she said, looking at me the way you'd look at a courier who showed up at the wrong address. "You're still here." "Where's Nora's room?" I asked. "Where are her books?" "Garrett packed everything that was yours. Or hers. This isn't really her home, Brooke. She's visited, 4 times?" She said it like geography was the measure of belonging. Like a 7-year-old needed to earn her place in her own grandmother's house. I felt something lock into position behind my ribs. Not anger exactly. Clarity. I walked to the car, loaded the boxes into the trunk, buckled Nora into her booster seat. Then I came back to the porch. Sloane was still standing there, sipping her wine, watching me like a show. "You can keep the locks," I said. "You can keep every room in this house. But you will not speak about my daughter again. Not to me, not to Garrett, not to anyone in this town. That's not a request." Sloane's smile thinned. She stepped back inside and closed the door. I got in the car. Nora was holding her damp stuffed rabbit against her chest. "Where are we going, Mom?" she asked. I didn't have an answer yet. I just drove. We ended up at the Riverview Motel on Route 7, a mile outside town. $49 a night. 2 double beds, a microwave, and a window that looked out over the parking lot toward the river. Nora thought it was an adventure. She bounced on the bed and asked if we could order pizza. I said yes because I couldn't say anything else without my voice cracking. I sat on the edge of the other bed and stared at my phone. I had a condo in Columbus. I had a life there. A good one. I could pack Nora up, drive 2 hours west, and never set foot in Marietta again. Let Garrett have the house. Let him have the sign and the shop and the whole crumbling kingdom. I didn't need it. I'd built my own. But Voss had said stay. Your father made changes. And Ruth, my mother, had met with Voss alone after the first funeral and come back looking like a woman who'd set something down she'd been carrying for decades. I owed it to her to hear whatever this was. And honestly, and I'll be straight with you here, Marietta was the only place Nora had ever seen her grandparents. The backyard with the marigolds. The river path where my father used to take me fishing on Saturday mornings, back before he decided I wasn't worth the time. The 18 acres behind the property, down by the water, where the old boathouse sat under a canopy of sycamores. Nora loved that land. She called it the river place. So I stayed. Not to fight, not to win anything. I stayed because Voss asked, because my mother would have wanted me to hear it, and because my daughter deserved to know this town the way I used to, before the Merritt name became something that only counted if you were born male. Raymond Voss's office was on the 2nd floor of a limestone building on 3rd Street, 3 doors down from the shop. The stairwell smelled like old paper and lemon oil. His desk was walnut, built by my grandfather. The bookshelves behind him held 40 years of Ohio Revised Code and a framed photo of him shaking hands with my father at some Rotary dinner in the 90s. "Sit down, Brooke," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from him. He didn't do small talk. I liked that about him. The formal reading is next Thursday. Both you and Garrett are required to be present. Required? Your father's will has a provision that can only be administered with both children in attendance. I'm the executor. Those are the terms. I leaned forward. Voss, what did my father change? He folded his hands on the desk, the way careful people do when they're choosing words. After your brother's business difficulties, after your father co-signed certain obligations and restructured certain debts, Tom revised a section of his will. He added a condition to the disposition of a specific asset. Which asset? The back acres. The 18 acres along the river, including the boathouse. My chest tightened. The river place. What kind of condition? The kind that requires both beneficiaries to submit a verified financial statement before the asset can be awarded. Your father wanted proof, documented, certified proof, that whoever receives that land can hold it without leveraging it, mortgaging it, or losing it to creditors. He paused. Your father learned something, Brooke. Late. But he learned it. What did he learn? Voss picked up a pen, a heavy silver thing, engraved, and tapped it once on the desk. That the loudest person in the room isn't always the one you should trust with the keys. He stood. Thursday, 10 a.m., bring documentation. Bring. Garrett and Sloane moved into the house within 48 hours. By the weekend, they'd ripped out Ruth's kitchen cabinets, the ones my grandfather had built, solid maple, dovetail joints, and replaced them with flat-pack modernist things from a catalog. Sloane posted photos to Instagram. New chapter. Honoring the legacy by making it ours. 72 likes. I drove past the shop on Monday and saw a hand-lettered sign taped to the window. Estate sale, tools and equipment. Everything must go. My father's tools, his draw knives, his hand planes. 30 years of carefully maintained steel, each piece oiled and hung in order on the pegboard wall. Garrett was selling them off like yard sale junk. I parked across the street and sat there for 10 minutes, engine running, watching strangers walk out carrying my father's chisels in plastic bags. I almost drove away. Almost. Then I saw it, shoved against the back wall behind a stack of scrap lumber. My father's toolbox. The old green metal one with the dented lid and the brass latch. The will had specifically left it to me. Personal hand tools and toolbox to Brooke. The only thing my name was attached to. I walked in. Garrett was at the counter counting cash. He looked up. You're not welcome here. That toolbox is mine, I said. Dad's will lists it. You know that. He stared at me for a long beat. Then he shrugged. Take it. It's junk anyway. Just like everything else he left you. The toolbox was heavier than I expected. I carried it to the car with both arms, set it in the trunk next to Nora's car seat. Something shifted inside when I put it down, a metallic scrape, like an object sliding against the tin lining. I didn't open it yet. I wish I had. I want to pause here, because I know some of you have held a box like this. The only thing a parent left you, while someone else took the house. If that's you, tell me in the comments what was in your box. A ring, a Bible, a set of measuring cups. I want to hear it. And if this story is landing, subscribe so the algorithm stops burying it. Okay, back to that toolbox. And the woman who showed up at my motel room 3 days later. Aunt Carol showed up at the Riverview Motel on a Wednesday evening, unannounced, with a Tupperware of potato soup and an agenda. She was 63, Ruth's younger sister, a retired school secretary who'd lived in Belpre her whole life. She wore a fleece vest and orthopedic shoes, and an expression that was trying very hard to look sympathetic. I heard about the house, she said, settling onto the edge of the bed like she owned the room. Nora was doing homework at the little desk. Carol glanced at her once, then turned back to me. Brooke, honey, I know this feels unfair. But you need to understand. This is how it's always been. Your father's father did the same thing. My father did the same thing. Boys keep the land. Girls marry out. There it was. The family catechism. Straight from the book of Tom Merritt. Carol, I'm not married, I said. I have a 7-year-old daughter sleeping in a motel room because my brother threw our things in the rain. And that's terrible. It is. But fighting it will only make things worse. She leaned forward. I gave up my share of your grandfather's farm, 40 acres. I signed it over to my brother because that's what was expected. And you know what? I survived. You will too. She said it like survival was the ceiling, like a woman's highest ambition should be to endure the theft with grace. Did you want those 40 acres, Carol? She blinked. For half a second, something honest moved across her face, a flicker of old anger, old loss, the kind that calcifies into acceptance because the alternative is too heavy. It doesn't matter what I wanted, she said. It matters what works. She left the soup, she left her advice, and she left me sitting in that motel room, understanding for the first time that Carol wasn't just enabling the tradition, she was its oldest casualty. The next morning, I set up my laptop on the motel desk, made a pot of terrible coffee from the in-room machine, and went back to being Brooke Merritt, CPA, CFE, founder of a forensic accounting practice that had billed $14 million in fees last fiscal year. Nora sat on the bed, watching cartoons with the volume low, while I reviewed a fraud referral from a manufacturing company in Akron. Numbers steadied me. They always had. Numbers don't play favorites. They don't care if you're a son or a daughter. They just tell you what's true. At noon, I called Gwen Avery, my partner at the firm. Technically, the managing partner now, since I'd sold my majority stake but kept an advisory role and a meaningful equity position. How's small-town life treating you? She asked. My brother sold my father's tools and my aunt brought me potato soup and a lecture about knowing my place. Charming. Do they still think you're a bookkeeper? They think I'm a bookkeeper who can't afford her own apartment. Gwen was quiet for a beat. Then, Brooke, do they even know what you're worth? I looked out the window at the parking lot. My Honda Civic sat between a pickup truck and a minivan. No one in Marietta had ever seen the inside of my portfolio. No one had ever asked. They never asked, I said. And you never told them? No. Why? I thought about it. The honest answer was complicated. Pride, stubbornness, the leftover sting of being told my work was a hobby. But the simplest answer was this: because I shouldn't have to prove my value to people who decided I had none before I was old enough to talk. Gwen let out a long breath. Fair enough. But Brooke, if there's a reading, and if something's at stake, you might have to show those numbers whether you want to or not. 2 days before the reading, I drove past the house on Maple Lane to check on Ruth's garden. Old habit. The marigolds were already dying. Nobody was watering them. But that's not what stopped me. There was a man on the front porch, mid-40s, wearing a polo shirt with a bank logo on the chest. He was speaking to Garrett through the screen door, and Garrett's voice had a pitch I'd never heard before. Tight, defensive, almost pleading. The estate will cover it, Garrett was saying. Once probate clears, I'll have access to everything. You'll get your payment. Mr. Merritt, this notice is the third we've sent. The balance on the second mortgage is past due by... I said the estate will cover it. Garrett saw me parked at the curb and his expression shifted from panic to fury in about 2 seconds. He stepped out, slammed the screen door, and the banker retreated to his sedan without finishing his sentence. I didn't wave. I didn't speak. I just watched. A second mortgage. On the house Garrett was already treating as his personal property. On the house he'd thrown me out of. On the house he claimed was worth fighting for. Something my father always said came back to me. One of his less terrible sayings. A man who borrows against his foundation is a man standing on a trapdoor. I'd assumed Tom was talking about the shop. About keeping the business debt-free. But sitting in my car, watching the banker's sedan disappear down Maple Lane, I started to wonder if my father had been talking about Garrett all along. I drove back to the motel. I didn't open the toolbox that night either. Something told me I should wait until I was ready for whatever was inside, but I was running out of reasons to wait. The night before the reading, I finally opened the toolbox. Nora was asleep. The motel room was quiet except for the hum of the mini fridge and the occasional truck passing on Route 7. I set the green metal box on the bed and unlatched the brass clasp. Inside, a coping saw, a small block plane, a set of marking gauges, and beneath them, tucked against the tin lining like someone had placed them there deliberately, 3 things that changed everything. The first was the carpenter's pencil. Not just any pencil, this one had been sharpened recently, and on the flat side, scratched in my father's cramped handwriting, TMBM. Tom Merritt to Brooke Merritt. An arrow, a transfer, like he was passing something forward. The second was the brass key, the same shape as the one on my leather fob, the one that no longer opened the front door. But this key was different, smaller, older. I turned it over in my hand and saw a tag wired to the bow, the kind of metal tag you'd find on a storage locker. Stamped into it, boathouse, back acres, not the house key. Never the house key. This was the key to the boathouse on the 18 acres along the river. The place my father used to take me fishing. The place Nora called the river place. The third thing was a folded document. I opened it with hands that were steadier than they should have been, given what I was looking at. It was a lien notice from First Federal Savings. A second mortgage on the house at 14 Maple Lane, dated 3 years ago, for $340,000. My father's signature was at the bottom. In the margin, in pencil, he'd written 7 words. Brooke, ask Voss about the back acres. I read it twice. Then I picked up my phone and called Voss at 11 p.m. He answered on the second ring, like he'd been waiting. You found the lien notice, Voss said. Not a question. $340,000, I said. On the house. Your father took a second mortgage 3 years ago to cover your brother's debts. Garrett's spec home venture collapsed. He'd overextended on 2 properties in Williamstown, borrowed from private lenders at predatory rates. He was facing personal bankruptcy. Your father co-signed the original loans and then refinanced everything against the house to consolidate. I sat on the motel bed and pressed the phone against my ear. So the house Garrett just kicked me out of is encumbered? Heavily. The equity is negligible. The shop building carries a separate lien, smaller, about $40,000, from a supplier Garrett never paid. Together, the homestead parcel your brother is set to inherit comes with roughly $380,000 in secured debt against maybe $400,000 in asset value. He's inheriting a break-even. If he's lucky. If the